Welcome to episode 55 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hello.
Hey, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode, new ones are normally out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite platform to get the latest first, and please do rate and review us, and drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic and our guest for this episode.
Trust me. Trust is earned, not given. Trust is a two-way street. You probably have a few more quotes about trust in your back pocket too, but the phrase to remember when it comes to cybersecurity is zero trust.
In the much-discussed executive order adopted earlier this year, President Biden said, quote, "The federal government must lead the way and increase its adoption of security best practices, including by employing a zero-trust security model. And organizations of all types are encouraged to follow suit, but just what is zero trust and how can your business adopt this model?" We welcome Fortinet Senior Director of Product Marketing, Peter Newton, to help shed some light on the subject. Peter, thanks very much for joining us.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for having me on here. This is great.
And so to sort of start the discussion on this topic, you wrote a blog post recently, how to implement a zero trust security strategy. So for a primer, for anyone who's maybe heard the term but isn't fully familiar with what it means, what is zero trust?
That's a good question and it actually does come up a lot in customer conversations. It's unfortunately getting to be a bit overused. But what zero trust is fundamentally about is shifting the way that we connect users and devices to the assets, applications, and data sets they need from an old model where we would verify or identify and authenticate someone or something once, and then they would be in this trusted zone, and then they'd be allowed to go about their business. With zero trust, what you want to do is you don't want to have a single one-time verification event and then implicitly trust that user or device based on their location. With zero trust, you want to go back and re-authenticate, re-identify, revalidate those users and devices each time that they're connecting to those assets and applications. And as a part of that, you're creating smaller zones of control. So when you are authenticating people and devices, you're granting them smaller access to network resources, to data resources. So zero trust is all about reducing the amount of trust that you provide to someone or something, both on a time basis as well as on a breadth of resources available.
And so this is opposed to something like a more wide user segment group where you say, all right, you need to be in this job role in user group A, so you have access to everything user group A does perpetually. In this case, you're sort of making each user their own user segment and making them sort of re-verify themselves at several steps, correct?
Yeah, that's certainly one way. I will admit that many companies, as they're doing this, they are utilizing those role-based definitions. Because if you think about it, if two people are both in finance, for example, and have similar jobs, they're actually going to need access to similar types of applications. So from an administrative standpoint, it is easier to say, okay, these two folks should have the same rights and accesses. That said, when they join the network or request access to applications, you are going to be verifying them on an ongoing basis. But certainly role-based access is, I think, an inherent part of a lot of the zero trust implementations that are out there.
And so you talk about the location as another big factor here, especially now that we have so many people working remotely. How does zero trust really improve security in that type of situation?
Yeah, so zero trust actually was not created for the pandemic, but companies that had a zero trust solution in place meant that shifting to remote work was almost a non-event because they already had systems in place that could deal with location-independent authentication of users and devices. So location can be used as part of the verification process, but really you want to set up your authentications and verifications based on the devices and the device identification and the users authentication. So it's not, hey, if you're in the office, then you're trusted. It's, hey, it's because you're you that you're trusted. So a big part of zero trust is getting away from location-based trust and implicit trust based on where someone is and really providing trust based on who that person is, and then granting them access based on the role that they have at the company.
So is this zero trust model growing in popularity fairly rapidly, or is this getting implemented by a lot of businesses?
Well, zero trust is much more of a philosophy as opposed to people who think, oh, well, I just buy these two products together, deploy them, and I've got zero trust. It's really more a matter of how do you architect your organization? How do you architect the network? How do you design the various systems to work together? And so companies are actually, there's a spectrum of zero trust that companies are all along, and people are all along that spectrum. They can have very minimal amounts of zero trust or a lot of zero trust implemented in their network. If you just, take your earlier example of role-based access, that's something that's been around for a long time. A lot of companies are doing that. That is an element of zero trust. It's kind of the first step on that zero trust journey. So to your question, is this growing in popularity? Absolutely, it's growing in popularity. People are seeing and understanding the benefits of more granular access, more controlled access by users and devices. It helps and enhances the security of an organization in so many different ways, addressing so many of the different types of threats that are out there. And because of the design of zero trust, it inherently makes the organization more resilient to breaches because of the ongoing verification, because of that minimal access that's granted. Even if an account is compromised, if a user is compromised, a device is compromised, the impact that has on the rest of the network is minimized as well. So certainly zero trust is gaining popularity. That's part of why I think zero trust was the most searched term in security in the past year, because it does sound wonderful, but really it does actually bring concrete benefits to organizations. So yes, it is popular. Yes, it's growing in interest, and companies are deploying zero trust into their networks.
And so you said a lot of companies have elements of this already, but they may have heard the term. Maybe they do want to take that next step and make it an overarching philosophy. Is it kind of a step-by-step process then to get further to the correct end of the spectrum or the full end of the spectrum?
Yeah. And if you Google, steps to zero trust, I'm sure you'll find several articles about it. But there are some basic things you want to do. First, you need to shift from looking at your network and organization from this is my safe zone and this is my unsafe zone to say, hey, what are the assets I need to protect? What are the workloads I want to connect people to? What are the applications? And who are those people and devices I want to connect them? So it's much more of looking at the users and endpoints and connecting them to the assets and applications. And then you start deploying out technologies. You'll probably have something around identity and access management, basically being able to know and control who's on your network. Then you'll want to roll out something to deal with those devices that don't have a user associated with them. Think about printers and IP phones and HVAC controllers. So maybe a network access control device, a NAC device, might be useful in deploying zero trust principles for the devices on your network. And, you've got users and devices. You also need to have control points. I talked about those zones of control. So you might have internal segmentation firewalls deployed. You might want to take a look at how those are being deployed. And, other technologies like zero trust network access that are designed specifically to connect users to applications is another step on that zero trust journey to really bring the principles of zero trust to how you're serving up applications and information to users no matter where they are.
So sounds like a lot of it's going to be sort of network infrastructure work. And you kind of mentioned that in your article, that one of the big first steps is just deciding who has what level of access and sort of establishing those zones of control. So what are some of the challenges when it comes to, overhauling your access lists?
Well, like many security solutions, it's wise to take a crawl, walk, run approach as you're rolling out some of these zero trust principles. If you don't have role-based access and you're shifting to role-based access, you first need to map and understand what are all the applications that a given role needs. The last thing we want to do with zero trust is to impede a company's or an organization's ability to do their job. Implemented correctly, zero trust is actually an easier user experience with many of the security steps and authentication taking place transparently behind the scenes. But the security shouldn't, as I say, it shouldn't prohibit productivity. It can actually enable productivity by providing connectivity no matter where the user is and on a variety of devices so that users can be productive, whether they're at home, in an airport, a coffee shop, and in the office, and get the same levels of security no matter where they are.
So when organizations look into further implementing zero trust, when they, in our current environment where we do have a lot more remote workers, is there any additional challenge to doing so in that situation? Or because we're not worried so much about the location of the employees, it's something that they can do regardless?
Well, zero trust and remote work pardon the pun, work well together because the principles of zero trust, one of the basic concepts is it's network independent, it's location independent. So the securities that you would set up, even if everybody was in the office, are the same policies and technologies that you want to be employing, even when folks are remote. So I would say that if companies are looking for advice as to how to go about thinking about it, is recognize that right now there are a lot of people working remotely. Very soon we are expecting people to be coming back to offices and working in a hybrid environment where a couple of days might be out of the office, a couple of days will be in the office, so that when you're deploying your zero trust technologies and solutions, just make sure that you're doing so in a way that's providing zero trust, again, no matter where someone is located.
And so in terms of people who have looked into this, I don't know if you've had conversations with some companies or had some other research. Is there a group that's a little more hesitant? Do they think, oh, this might be too expensive or too difficult to get to where we want to be?
The concepts of zero trust and the benefits are pretty much useful across all verticals, across all industries. If there is a difference in the adoption of zero trust, I will say that mid-size and larger organizations are adopting it earlier than the smaller organizations. And I think that's more a reflection of the skills that they have within their IT and security groups to be able to try a new technology. But the tools and capabilities for zero trust are equally relevant and able to be deployed into smaller organizations. I think it's just more a matter of confidence of those organizations and willingness to embrace newer technologies.
So if they are low on maybe bandwidth in the IT space, a smaller business potentially, are there some ways that they can still go about it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's many partners out there are building up robust zero trust practices and can assist in both the deployment and ongoing management of zero trust solutions in companies of all sizes. So really, it's a matter of, hey, if you're interested in improving the security of the organization, improving the resilience, while at the same time improving user experience, then looking down, how do I get to zero trust and finding a partner who can help with that is certainly a great way to do that if the internal staffing isn't up to it.
So what aspects of Fortinet's OS and their appliances out there really helped facilitate zero trust from the manufacturer standpoint?
Looking specifically at Fortinet's solution, we have zero trust capabilities really throughout our security fabric. We do have a portion of the security fabric we've titled our zero trust access solutions, and those deal with bringing users and devices onto network and assets. And that includes our identity and access management products for the authentication of who's on your network and what's on your network. We have our fabric agent. It's an endpoint that is a part of our zero trust network access solution that works in conjunction with our FortiOS, the operating system for our firewalls, to deliver ZTNA, that application access for users, no matter where they are. And that ZTNA capability is available at no cost to Fortinet customers. So if they already have the FortiGate and they already have the FortiClient Fabric Agent, maybe they're using the FortiClient for the VPN capability that it has, they can shift from using VPNs to get remote access to using our ZTNA remote access at no cost. It's just built in. We at Fortinet are firm believers that zero trust is the way that security is going, and we're designing this into our products now to make it easier for our customers to deploy zero trust into their networks.
And so taking a step back a little bit with the idea of zero trust being an organizational philosophy in a way backed up by actual actions, but how important is it to communicate that philosophy, to set some sort of guidelines in writing the entire organization can see?
Well, having a zero trust initiative backed by the C-level is certainly an important way to have an effective shift towards zero trust principles. Just, letting everybody know, first first in the IT organization and then in the broader company, that applying these zero trust principles within the organization really enables folks to look at how are we doing this? How can we bring more zero trust principles into our network design, into our security products? And it really is kind of the first step in moving organizations towards a more zero trust deployment. So absolutely, getting that executive sponsorship, that executive blessing and saying, hey, this is the direction we want to go is a key first step in deploying zero trust in your organization.
And I would imagine also that then leads to the employee buy-in for the non-IT staff. We actually just in our last episode went over a survey where a number of employees expressed displeasure, I guess, at dealing with some security measures to get on when they're working remotely, for instance. But I'd imagine that if there was a structure that was communicated well, that would help with that type of attitude as well.
Well, one of the things about zero trust is, at least with Fortinet solution, is deploying ZTNA for that employee access can actually simplify and make it easier for employees to get their work done remotely. Zero trust does not mean you can't use single sign-on capabilities. You can still use those, and it can automate the secure tunnels necessary to connect securely over the internet. Whereas using VPNs, which is kind of the standard for remote access, people might have to remember which applications need to have the VPN fired up, which ones don't, and people might forget. And then you have to go through the additional step of starting the VPN, and then you start the application. So ZTNA can actually improve productivity and create a better user experience. As I said, there's no reason why ZTNA needs to be thought of as an additional security barrier. It's really just looking at how you're connecting users to applications, devices to resources, and you can do that in an efficient and very user-friendly fashion.
Great. Anything else you wanted to add on zero trust?
Well, I think we've hit on the key points that zero trust is kind of the way that organizations are recognizing is the right way to organize how they look at users and devices and the assets and applications that they want to connect to. The concept has been around for more than 10 years, but I think the recent advances in technologies that have really enabled zero trust principles to be deployed into networks recently have really led to an increase in the activity around zero trust. And then also, I think the pandemic highlighted the shortcomings of some of our remote access solutions that had been in place, and people are looking for something better than VPN. And ZTNA is one of those zero trust principles that has really started to shine during this pandemic. So this has been a great opportunity to talk about zero trust. As you can see, I'm very interested and passionate about the topic, and I'm glad we've had this opportunity to share a little bit of that with your audience.
And where can people find more from you on not only this article, but you write fairly regularly as well?
Yes, there are a number of articles out on the internet, so you can certainly either search on my name, Peter Newton, or on the topics of zero trust access, zero trust network access. Also at Fortinet.com, we have a variety of information available around zero trust solutions. And so not only on the main site, but we have dedicated sites with content available to learn more about the issues around zero trust and possible solutions for a variety of zero trust technologies adding into your network.
Great. And we'll have a link to the particular blog post that we referenced earlier in our description, how to implement a zero trust security strategy. Peter, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin.
It's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a closer look at the top stories in the cybersecurity world and talk about what they may mean to you. Now, headline number 1, REvil affiliates confirm leadership were cheating dirtbags. I always like to give good points for a headline that catches your eye. There are plenty of bad and misleading ones out there that don't, but this one's not so much about good or bad. It's just kind of fun. Anyway, according to ThreatPost, one of the higher profile ransomware cells out there, REvil, you may have heard of them, may have been behaving less than above board when it comes to their affiliates. Exactly how less than above board?
So this came up in something called the Hackers Court, which I guess is a Russian language hacking forum where different hackers of the world can come in and trade their secrets and so forth. And in this case, they leveled some claims against REvil that they were basically using backdoor chats and secondary channels to, I guess, jump into negotiations unannounced.
Yeah, so the story is, and it's kind of a two-parter here because there was an initial report that this was probably happening, and then a follow-up report that actually has some people more directly making that accusation that, yes, in fact, it did happen. So basically, as you said, a double chat is what they're calling part of it here, and that is that the REvil admins would have a chat sort of mirroring the other chat that would be taking place between an affiliate who actually deployed a ransomware, REvil ransomware in this case, to a victim. So it would be a chat between the affiliate and the victim, and the REvil admins would be able to see that chat and take over the identity of really either side in a given situation. So they would assume the identity of the victim to the affiliate and say, yeah, we're not going to pay the ransom, and go away. Well, on another chat, they would be assuming the identity of the affiliate, talking to the victim and finishing the negotiations and taking all of the money.
Right, and this makes more sense once you realize that a lot of these services being sold are ransomware as a service operations. So in these cases, the REvil leadership would sort of rent out their ransomware to the affiliates, who would then try to get a ransom out of a victim, and then at the end of this, REvil and the affiliate would split whatever profit they made. So in this case, REvil was supposed to keep 30%, whereas the affiliates keep 70% of whatever ransom. But as you said, they would jump in this double chat, pretend the whole negotiation had collapsed, and then just kind of finish it off themselves without the affiliate and pocket their 70% as well.
Yeah, so they'd go from 30% to 100%. And kind of hard for as a service model to not pay the people who are actually deploying it. You can see why there could have been some hard feelings there.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you trust a group with the word evil in their name? I don't understand. So apparently this was not the first time this kind of claim had come up with REvil. The first time it popped up in these hackers' courts, as they call them, was back in May of this year, 2021. And then the claims came back to light after it was confirmed by the threat intelligence firm Advanced Intelligence that these backdoors and double chats do in fact exist. So proof is out there, and the issue is coming back to the hackers' court.
Yes, and so I know they just announced the reimagining of Night Court. I don't know if Hackers Court would figure into the writing of that one, but whether or not, it sounds like it could be a sort of interesting angle to take for dramatic tension out there. So this will sort of be litigated there a little bit more. And, sometimes the penalty is just the sort of excommunication of an offending entity, because this article actually mentions the whole issue with the Colonial Pipeline, where behavior was not exactly what everyone in the hacking community would have liked in terms of who was targeted and how it was carried out. And so we saw some sort of consequences there too.
Right. So there's a bit of a shake up in the ransomware world, which explains this second part about Lockbit 2.0, which is a rival ransomware as a service gang that sort of jumped in, and they've been very popular and growing in popularity. And they also confirmed that they had spoken to some former REvil affiliates that had shared that they had been scammed. So I guess this is Lockbit's chance to jump on and trash their old rivals and maybe take their spot at the top.
Yeah. What's interesting is sort of noted in this piece that we haven't discussed before, but REvil was another one of those big ones. DarkSide was the Colonial Pipeline ransomware gang, and we saw that they pretty much went away. They were shut down server-wise and everything a few months ago. REvil pretty much did the same thing. Their servers had shut down, but now they've sort of, in this article, they used the phrase sputtered back to life because there's some under new management, basically, that's running the show as REvil again.
But all of this coming out now is going to be a bit of a knock to their credibility, if you want to call it that. I guess their street cred. So even with new management coming in, I imagine a lot of the past affiliates will be second-guessing whether they want to give these guys a chance and continue working or not.
And it even suggested in this piece that these actions were taking place both under previous management and potentially under new management. So, yeah, if they're continuing those same practices, then we may not see REvil being long for the hacking world again.
Well, there is no honor among thieves.
Now, headline number 2. EU denounces Russian malicious cyber activity aimed at member states. So this one takes place the week prior to us recording. A top European Union official called out Russia for its involvement in recent hacking efforts directed towards the governments of multiple member states, describing these efforts as unacceptable. And a lot of it centers around a cyber campaign, a malicious cyber campaign that's been dubbed Ghostwriter.
Right, so this Ghostwriter campaign has targeted numerous members of parliaments, and by parliaments with an S, I assume they mean multiple parliaments throughout the EU, representing multiple countries, government officials, politicians, and members of the press and civil society in the EU. So these are attempts to gain access to networks, steal data, try to steal credentials, things of that nature. So I don't think this is one specific operation so much as it is a larger general net of them.
He's saying basically, guys, lay off, all right? We're getting lots of this stuff happening right now. And I think it appears largely tied to a report from the New York Times a couple weeks ago that the German Federal Prosecutor's Office was opening an investigation into a recent spate of Russia-linked phishing emails aimed at German lawmakers ahead of the country's election this month. According to AP, the German Foreign Ministry formally protested about the hacking efforts to Russia and specifically accused Ghostwriter of using cyber attacks and disinformation to target Germany ahead of the election. I've never heard of any kind of election disinformation campaigns coming out of Russia before, have you?
Right. So this article does, in fact, point out the 2016 U.S. presidential elections were a target of these same types of campaigns, as well as a leak of thousands of emails from the campaign of French President Emmanuel Macron in 2017 ahead of their election. So there's definitely appears to be a pattern.
Yeah, kind of on brand, I think. But jumping back to who this top European Union official is, Josep Borrell. He's the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. He said some EU member states have observed malicious cyber activities collectively designated as Ghostwriter and associated these with the Russian state. Such activities are unacceptable as they seek to threaten our integrity and security, democratic values and principles, and the core functioning of our democracies. And he says a couple of times here, he says these activities are contrary to the norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace as endorsed by all UN member states and attempt to undermine our democratic institutions and processes, including by enabling disinformation and information manipulation. And beyond just the comments, he threatened potential further steps to respond to the attacks.
Right, and this is, I think, somewhat expected and completely in the norm slow escalation of things. We have reached the furrowed brows point where it is now pointing actual fingers toward an actual target rather than just more vague brow furrowing. So I guess what's changed here is that they are in fact naming the Russian Federation directly and blaming them, as well as I suppose this might be the first official EU denouncement as opposed to the UK or the United States. So more players to the fold.
Yes, and he urges the Russian Federation to adhere to the norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, or else they might furrow their brows even more. Interesting, this is a little digression, but in reading this story is from The Hill, which is a US-based news outlet, and yet when Borrell is quoted here saying the word behavior, it's spelled with O-U-R in this piece.
Well, you can actually hear the European pronunciation in writing, so
I'm just curious what the style justification was for that, but interesting.
Yeah, they gotta keep it native. So obviously we know of the sanctions leveled by the Biden administration against Russia for the SolarWinds hack back in April, and then of course we've heard of the Colonial Pipeline hack. We know that Vladimir Putin and Biden themselves have met in Geneva earlier in 2021 to sort of talk about this growing problem. But I guess the question is, where does it go from here? What is the next step after officially leveled brow furrowing?
Yes, we don't know what the next step would be for the EU, and would there be some sort of collective brow furrowing day between the US government, the UK, the EU, all of us jumping in and saying, hey,
we all agree with this now.
And would that do anything?
Yeah, maybe there'll be an officially worded letter as well.
Yes, strongly worded letter. Those are always good.
But the escalation continues.
Yes, and probably in a few months there will be someone else, maybe more than one person at a time will furrow their brows. Now, headline number 3. States at disadvantage in race to recruit cybersecurity pros. So this continues our ongoing look at the lack of staff in the cybersecurity field. And before we get started, I just wanted to point out the photo really struck me on this piece. It's a very oddly staged photo that's included in this article, so follow the link in the description to take a look for yourself. It's from the AP, and anyway, Austin Moody wanted to apply his cybersecurity skills in his home state of Michigan, so they start with sort of a case study here and wanted to team up with investigators for the state police to analyze evidence and track down criminals, but the recent graduate set the idea aside after learning an unpaid internship was his only way into the Michigan agency.
Right, and this is, like you said, it's a good case study, but it's also just one of many obstacles sort of in the way here when it comes to states hiring cybersecurity professionals. And when we talk about states, we're talking about actual state governments. And this piece also does go on to include city governments, sort of with the same brushstrokes, even going on to say that cities might be struggling with even more intense versions of these same issues.
Right. Yeah. I mean, budgets shrink a lot of times based on the size of the government entity. And they even mentioned the federal government having some problems, though there have been adjustments made there that are at least putting them on a little bit better track. So Moody, the person mentioned in that initial sentence that I had, he says, "I don't know many people that can afford to take an unpaid internship, especially when it's in such high demand in the private sector. Unpaid internships in cyber aren't really a thing beyond the public sector." So yeah, if somebody's weighing a couple of options there, not that many people are able to afford to jump into a full-time or hardcore internship and not get money for it.
Right, and it's just a practical consideration. I imagine you're a college grad about to head out into the world with all these new certifications and, education marks on your resume, and one group says, well, hey, you can work an unpaid internship for a year and maybe get a job making below market value, or you can just walk right into this private sector, get a great job with all these benefits and starting salary and get started right away. Not too hard of a decision for most people, I imagine.
Even for somebody who may have wanted to go into the public service arena at some point, that's probably something they would kick down the road a little bit if they were considering it. They'd want to, get started, establish themselves, and then maybe if they were not as concerned about the salary down the road or something, then maybe they'd jump back into it. But yeah, the overall tone of this piece is just that, states have been among those hit fairly regularly from the variety of cyber attacks that are out there, ransomware especially as of late, and the outlook's not looking great for them because they just don't have the people to help defend themselves.
Yeah, they really don't have much in the way of attractive baubles to really get anybody to join their team, so to speak. So according to a survey by the Computing Technology Industry Association and National Institute of Standards and Technology, state governments needed to fill about 9,000 cybersecurity jobs this year, and very much likely that they will not fill all 9,000.
Yeah, and they even mentioned that the total is probably even higher than that because it doesn't count job listings that states only posted on their own employment portals, which would be another problem for the states if they were doing that. And if they were not advertising their jobs elsewhere, they probably have some trouble filling them.
Yeah, that could be one issue. Another being that the average salary for a local or state cyber employee lagged by about $25,000 behind the rest of the market for private sector and federal jobs.
Yeah, and again, the salary is only sort of one component. If we're talking about unpaid internships versus paid internships. Also, later in the piece, there's a discussion of just the resources to get out to job fairs, recruiting situations at colleges or places where people are being trained. Those resources don't exist very much for the states, so they're not there in front of the people, and, people don't even think of them as an option necessarily.
Right. The piece mentions that by the time these graduates are getting to the point of looking for a job, they're probably at a career fair or on college campuses being courted by private companies or the federal government already. So by the time the state agencies get there, they're pretty much the fourth, fifth, sixth person in line trying to pitch to these young kids.
And the pitch is something that they do consider somewhat important because, Moody, the person in the case study, talks about wanting to work in public service. There are people who really want to work in public service, want to work for state government, but maybe don't think of that as an option in this field. There are also certain things that people can get potentially out of working for a government that they can't get in the private sector. Maybe a little more certainty in terms of your work schedule. Sometimes in the private sector, there are just more fires to put out on a regular basis. You don't have the 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, leave work at work schedule that state governments sometimes are able to offer. So yeah, not even being able to present the sort of positives that state government could offer, even though the salary might not be competitive, that's hurting them.
Right. There definitely are some positives. One person actually describes the private sector work for places like Microsoft and Amazon as a meat grinder, which makes sense as you're constantly trying to keep up with new vulnerabilities and attacks every single day that we all see in the newspapers. So maybe a public sector job could be a little more chill, so to speak, which some people are into. So I guess another aspect of this issue is, as you said, they're unable to take these positives and frame them in such a way that their message becomes a contrast to what else is out there rather than trying to compete directly with what else is out there.
Yeah, and that's really a suggestion as a starting point maybe states should consider. They may not have the budget to offer the salaries that would put them right in line with others in the industry, but at the very least, getting in front of people might help them out. And, they mentioned the federal government too. Homeland Security officials back about 7 years ago now recognized that lower pay was keeping their agency at a disadvantage, but it took until this year that they published a rule allowing higher salaries for cybersecurity roles, which they have capped at $255,800, which is the maximum salary allowed for the vice president, incidentally.
So yeah, this is a very hyper-competitive field. They're not being given a whole lot of tools to recruit with, and I don't exactly know what the solution here is going to be, if any, but when you have very strict background check requirements and hoops to jump through, obviously that's going to cut who eventually makes it through that final hoop. So
yeah,
something to consider.
Yeah, and even with the federal government, jumping the salaries, the study in this piece notes that the $95,000 average salary of a local or state government employee lagged by $25,000 or more in 2020 compared with pay in the federal government, the financial services industry, and IT services. But even so, with the federal government getting more competitive salary-wise, they also note DHS has 2,000 cybersecurity job vacancies, and the Biden administration promoted 300 new hires this summer. So even in the places where the salaries are a little bit better and more competitive, they're struggling. So you can just imagine what's happening when they don't have even those resources to present.
One funny point in this article is that it does point out that while this issue is something that they really want to highlight and get out there, they don't want to highlight it too much because that might tip off the threat actors.
Yeah, right. So the state leaders are not being too cooperative in this piece and sharing exactly how many vacancies they have because they don't want to be the one with the most vacancies. So put the special
bullseye has the least
on
amount
them.
Of security. So.
Yeah. So yeah, problems all around here. Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, and thanks very much to Fortinet's Peter Newton for joining us. Check out the links in the description for more information about everything that we discussed. Subscribe or follow now however you listen to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available, and please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs, and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to get secure, stay secure.